Hey, hello. God, I got to get better at starting podcasts. Hey, welcome to another glorious episode of Jeff Has Cool Friends. I am the titular Jeff, and with me, I have titular cool friend. This is a good friend of mine. I am stoked to finally have him on the show. I met him on Halloween. It's the best night to meet somebody, a legend in the animation community, and one of the founding architects of The Simpsons, still with The Simpsons, among a million other things. David Silverman. David, how are you?
Hi, Jeff. Hello, everybody. And it's good to be on your show. This will be great because we've had conversations in the past. It's nice to share it with the others.
So, like several of my other cool friends that I've had on the show, I met you through Jennifer Muro, who is
Yep.
the glue, the epoxy of a lot of the social nerd world, more than you could ever imagine. And we met on Halloween, and it's funny because you and I hit it off, but we just knew each other as two guys at the thing, and then eventually it
Right.
was like, oh yeah, The Simpsons, and I was like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense.
And we
I've
did
heard
other things,
we did.
yeah.
Oh yeah,
We were just giving piles of candy out to kids,
we went
just handing.
generous.
Right.
So yeah, for those of you that don't know, Toluca Lake, which is sort of like a sort of side quest of Burbank, California, has this really like wonderful and vibrant Halloween culture, and so it's really fun to go there and see all the
Yeah.
kids
Yeah,
there.
it's really great. But particularly in my neighborhood, there is nothing. So it's a kitty ghost town on Halloween. So I really enjoyed doing that.
It it stands to wit for me that no matter where I've ever lived in my life, trick-or-treaters have never shown up. And I've never lived in a particularly isolated space. Maybe growing up I did, but like, I live in a neighborhood now and we don't ever have kids showing up to the door,
Oh
which is
yeah,
good
yeah.
because I'm at Jen Miro's place.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly. That's how we met, my friends.
that is how we met. And so now I obviously do my research before the show. I've watched a lot of interviews to make sure I don't just duplicate an interview of somebody else. And one thing that not a hypothesis, but something that I've noticed is from the art creation aspect of The Simpsons, it seems like you are a bit of a spokesperson for that. Going all the way back, it seems there's a ton of interviews where it seems like you either volunteered or somebody chose you to be the person to give a tour of the studio for Access Hollywood or to sit
Right,
down and
right.
talk about those things.
Well, it's probably a combination of two things. They really liked what I was doing directorially in the very beginning, and that's why they made me supervising director, which I was very flattered and surprised about. But I guess also I was adept at explaining and talking to the media, so that's why they chose me, I suppose, to do all those different tours, interviews, and so forth.
Obviously there are like interviews at places and things like that, but there's also like if there's like GQ or Access Hollywood or Extra or something like that, I could tell just how natural it seemed like you were with the media. And so I was like, oh, okay, this is a thing. Like this is just he's just really good at talking to people.
Well, I'll tell you
um
how it started in the very first season. Like actually, like I think, guess a few months into the broadcast in 1990, I had a friend from UCLA named John Melikar who had a show on one of the local radio stations here in Los Angeles. He called me and he said, "Do you want to be on the show?" And I said, "Sure, that'd be great." And I believe it was our still head of publicity, Antonia Kaufman, sort of went along just to see how I would do. And she said, "No, you were great. You were very natural. You had no fear of the microphone, and you just answered questions in a fun way." And that's kind of how it started. So from there, they started utilizing me more in different interviews. And it led to Matt Groening was approached to do college lectures, regarding The Simpsons at the same time. But he had already done so much of that with his Life in Hell creation that he didn't really care to do it anymore, to travel and all that. And they asked me, and I said, sure, I'd be happy to do that. Sounded like fun. So there was a time between like 19, maybe 91, I'm not sure when it started, through most of that decade that I was doing a lot of college tours. I think that sort of ended when I probably when I went to DreamWorks, but maybe I'm getting ahead of my story. But anyhow, to answer that question, I think that's how that all began.
Yeah. It Speaking of how it all began too, like every interview is different, right? Like every time you introduce yourself and every time you talk to a person on a show like this, it's got to be different. And yours is actually might be one of the hardest shows for me to have structured because I don't know where to start with you because you have so many fascinating, you have your finger in a lot of jars throughout my touchstone of history, including like, I mean, stuff like early work on the very memeified Turbo Teen, the kid that turns into a car.
Oh, that was, oh man, we can go way back. Sure. Tell you what, I'll just, what, why don't I just start at the beginning and you can interrupt when
Sure, you're
I'm
more
getting
than
my
welcome
dad.
to. Yeah, I'd love to hear it.
Well, born in New York, grew up in Silver Spring, Maryland. We moved there when I was 3 because my dad decided he was a professor at the University of Maryland, and he basically became a professor there. He was teaching up at a school up in Long Island called Stony Brook.
Mhm.
And anyhow, that's how I ended up in Maryland. And I always remember drawing ever since I was 4 years old. I was drawing funny books, and I called them funny books. And there were like little things that were inspired by watching a lot of cartoons because there was a lot of cartoons when I was growing up. So I was
What
4 years old. So this is
what were the ones
1960.
that what was appealing to you at that time?
Oh yeah, well, see, we'll go back because I was, you know, we're talking about from the years like, at the beginning, like 4 and 5, when I started like, paying attention, when we all start paying attention. So this is 1961 and 1962, ladies and gentlemen. So this is going back to when it was almost, and looking back, I didn't realize it as a kid, because I'm only 5 or 4, and it was sort of the beginning, or really sort of the early part of the beginning of Saturday morning cartoons. And I'm talking about the early days of Hanna-Barbera, Quick Draw McGraw, Yogi Bear, and Huckleberry Hound, all great cartoons with their pals, Jinx the Cats, and all that sort of things.
Mhm.
And of course, a Bugs Bunny show, which was my favorite because the animation was so superlative, and the humor was hilarious. And the Rocky and Bullwinkle show, later the Bullwinkle show, big influence. And I think, even at that young age, I could tell about the quality being different, but it didn't matter to me because I got the humor and the entertainment. And that is what connected with me. The other thing that was going on too is that there were two important cartoon artists that I remember growing up. And that was Charles Schulz, Peanuts.
Wow.
My parents were keen on collecting all the Peanuts books. They were very good at that. And my father, Joseph Silverman, may he rest in peace, was a great fan of Walt Kelly's Pogo. Now, many of
Oh
you may
yeah.
know Pogo, or they may not know Pogo. I say look them up on your local
Be
computer. Uh,
beautiful, beautiful background work on Pogo.
oh,
I know everybody focuses
incredible.
on Pogo, the
No,
character himself, but that those backgrounds were so
backgrounds were incredible. You're absolutely right. And
yeah.
not only that, it was like he got even better as he went along in this sort of work. You
In a
know?
way, when I looked at Pogo, I would say that would be the closest thing artistically from like comic strip kind of stuff to what would eventually become like Calvin and Hobbes of this
Oh
really
yes, yes,
elevated
totally.
illustration.
He was big influence on a lot of artists, including Watterson. Big fan of Pogo. And you could see it in Calvin and Hobbes. The
Oh yeah.
proportions Calvin and Hobbes are the same of Albert and Pogo. Same with Mike Smith and his Bone. His proportion of Bone and Funny Bone are the same.
Oh,
Albert
Jeff
and
Smith,
Pogo.
Bone,
Yeah,
the
Jeff
comic
Smith.
strip from
Sorry,
then.
my
Okay.
apologies. My
No, no, no,
apologies.
no. It's all
Jeff,
good. There's a
to
lot of
Jeff.
names. We come across a lot of names in this world, and there's a lot of Smiths to be found. So don't worry
Right.
about that.
Yes. But yes, Jeff Smith, and we talked about, he actually has one of the largest collections of Walt Kelly's Pogo, but
That
never the
that
doggone
makes a
less.
lot of sense.
That was a big influence on me. And later on, I find that Walt Kelly he was a Disney animator and a Disney story artist and a Disney animator. And his best pal in the world was Ward Kimball. And all these things started connecting. So that stuff started growing up. And then, of course, Mad Magazine came into my life.
Oh yeah.
And artists like everybody in between, from Sergio Aragonis to Mort Drucker and everybody in between, Don Martin, Bob Clark, all the artists, Dave Berg. I was totally enthralled with them. And this is what's interesting. I didn't read a lot of comic books. I read some, but I was more interested in cartoon art and Mad Magazine than I was in Marvel or DC Comics. I was aware of them and I would read them occasionally, but I was not an avid, not that I was not a fan, I just wasn't as charged by them artistically.
I think especially at that time too, like comic book art had a very studio style to it. where
Yeah.
there wasn't a
Yes.
lot, the flourishes weren't particularly grandiose. Every once in a while you'd get like a Jim Steranko or something like that. But
Right. Or Kirby and all that.
yes,
But you're right. I think that it came later. Sort
yeah.
of where.
So it stands to wit then that you are somebody who visually enjoys style, which I know people immediately say, like, well, yeah, everybody likes style. But what I mean by that is like, instead of like trend, there is somebody that develops their own personal style that can really go out to you. And then obviously comedy, like,
Yes.
comedy and that entertainment
Yes.
aspect, because comic books, especially at that time, were very dramatic.
That was the next part of it. Oh, one. There are others, but another important, or two important things to throw in the mix. Of course, as a kid, I was enthralled with Dr. Seuss, as most kids were, but I was really enthralled with the art style. Really,
Mhm.
really taken by the art style. There were other children's books, but that was the one that really enthralled me because that all seemed to be in the same direction. I mean, he always reminded me of what Jay Ward and the Rocky and Bullwinkle and the gang were doing, and even what Walt Kelly was doing,
Yeah.
and even to a certain
Massachusetts,
extent what Charles Schultz.
Massachusetts' own
Yeah, exactly.
Theodore.
Oh, and one more artist the throne has always been a big influence for me was Al Hirschfeld, the great Broadway caricaturist, although
Oh,
also film,
that's
because he,
awesome.
yeah.
Did he
So
wait, didn't he also was an artist for the New Yorker as well, right? Like, wasn't that
not the New Yorker, it was the New York
no,
Times that he
the
did the theater
Times.
page.
Yeah.
Yes, the New York Times that he did the theater page.
Yeah.
And he literally like kind of drew the theater of the 20th century. He also, though, at a very early age, even in terms of in the beginnings, like in the 20s, he was doing work for MGM, which he continued. So a lot of the iconic caricatures of Laurel and Hardy and the Marx Brothers are Al Hirschfeld posters.
Yeah.
Even the Wizard of Oz poster, the original poster, if you look in the lettering, there's Al Hirschfeld drawings in them. So
Hmm.
he worked a lot with MGM very early on. And he, I think, did the first quintessentially, iconic caricature of Laurel and Hardy back in like the late 20s, early 30s, or something like that. And I understood that his drawing of Groucho Marx, he had sort of designed his hair almost like in these sort of interesting triangles to the point where the makeup department at MGM tried to sort of follow it a little bit in subsequent films, like around the Day of the Races and all those films
Oh wow.
beyond.
That's really fascinating, like to see, where those influences are and where the confluence comes. And one of the things that I've noticed, and this is again why I was like, it's hard to see, like, because going linear is great, but those influences and to see, and like obviously, your guys like your Tex Avery's and your Chuck Joneses and stuff. Like one of the big things is comedic timing and dynamism, right?
Yeah.
You are known for bringing that into The Simpsons in your direction and your animation of like the very, very sort of like quick turn, highly energetic style of comedy.
Yeah, I guess so. I think we all did it. I mean, I hear that a lot, and I do appreciate that, and I take it as a great compliment. I thank you. Although I think everybody had that idea coming. Although I've gotten some very good compliments from my fellow directors, so I guess maybe what you're saying is right. So I'll accept
I mean,
that.
here's what I'll say. It's literally a part of your Wikipedia page that somebody added that's what you
Right.
are known for.
Right.
So
That is probably true to a certain extent, but it's very interesting. We came about that. I'll sort of fast forward. Drawing, doing films, and going to actually. So one little side jaunt from doing films. Kodak used to have a film festival or for teenagers called the Kodak Teenage Movie Awards competition, and I entered them, and I actually won like first place in animation, and they were very, Kodak was very flush with cash back then, so they had us young kids go to the Plaza Hotel to stay there for the
oh damn.
event. And my roommate was another young animator from the East Coast named Eric Goldberg. And Eric and I are like the oldest friends in the animation business because we
Wow.
met each other when I was 17 and he was 19.
That is
And
wild.
and I have to tell you, Eric, the genius animator of probably the most genius comic animator of our generation, was a genius animator at the age of 19. I mean, he had it nailed. He could animate as if he was in Chuck Jones's unit right then. And I ain't kidding. He was a total prodigy, total enfant terrible when he was 10, and
I
just got
I have a piece of his artwork.
nice,
I have
nice.
a animation cell of MC Scat Cat.
Ha
And
ha.
if I recall, he was the animator on the Opposites Attract video with Paula Abdul when he wasn't working on all the Disney films and stuff. I believe he did the majority of those cells, yeah.
Oh, right, right,
Yeah,
right.
of
Yeah.
the
But
animation. Yeah.
any event. So that was sort of all along the way. So right after that, went to University of Maryland. I decided to do a caricature of the National Symphony Orchestra. So that's a little component. Was that, yeah, yes, that only took me like 2 years from like 18 to 20, but that became helpful getting me work when I got to UCLA to the animation workshop. From those drawings, I started doing drawings for the Martin Bernheimer, who was the great music critic of the LA Times back then, around 1980, which led to me doing illustrations for a company called Alfred Publishing. And I illustrated the Alfred Basic Piano Library, which is still in print, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh,
If
wow.
you care to go, yes, you can look it up on, I think it's even sold on Amazon. But that sort of kept me going when I got out of UCLA around 1980. Yeah, and started freelancing, mostly doing freelance cartooning, some animation. But then I met this great guy, Bill Kopp, at a film festival. I won another film festival called the Focus Awards, which actually sort of was a continuation of the Kodak Awards. This was sponsored by Mitsubishi. And I won in like 1982, and I came back in 84 to greet current winners. And one of the guys I met was Bill Kopp, and he was this wild and crazy animator. And about a year later, he's working on another film with his pal, Savage Steve Holland. He had done the animation on a film called Better Off
Better
Dead.
Off Dead, which is one of my favorite films of all time.
Great film, yeah. And I remember seeing it. I said, well, after actually, yeah. Then I realized that Bill had done the drawings, and then he got in touch with me because he was doing One Crazy Summer. So I was an animator on that, doing the cute and fuzzy bunnies. That and that was a great deal of fun. And that was from 85 to about 86. One of the other animators on that show was Wes Archer. Great, great animator, director, genius. Jack Mack and Rad Boy Go was a big influence on Mike Judge's Beavis and Butthead,
Oh, yeah.
which flash forward, by the way, and Wes Archer, also from Texas, like Mike Judge, is supervising director on King of the Hill. So,
Yeah. Yeah. He
really
went
kind of
from The Simpsons right to the King of the Hill, right?
exactly, yes, exactly. But Wes was the conduit to The Simpsons because he had worked at Klasky Chupo when it was just a very small company renting space out of Bob Clampett's building at 729 North Seward Street, where Bob Clampett did, he owned the building, well, he had gone. Sodi owned the building, Sodi Clampett, his widow. But in that very building, one of my favorite shows as a kid was animated, The Beanie and Cecil Show. I was a
Oh,
big fan of
yeah.
that show. Yeah. And Wes gets in touch with me and initially Bill Kopp. And the three of us are doing animation for the Tracy Ullman show that Klasky Chupo had gotten the contract from Gracie Films. And that's how we met Matt Groening, and that's how I got on The Simpsons. By the way, at the beginning of that year, it was 1987, I was going to take a pause from animation and actually work in general. I had saved up enough money that I was going to spend a year just practicing and trying to develop my own style, like really work at it, like 9 to 5, and do nothing but that. And then I get this call to work with Matt Groening, and I was like, "Oh, I love Life in Hell. I love Matt Groening's work. I'd be delighted to meet him, if nothing else. Sure, let's do that."
I want to step back for a second just to inform. So if you guys are listening, you've heard Klasky Chupo a lot, and that's a very strange and unique thing if you're not in the world of animation to not know. Very known for highly stylized animation. A lot of that sort of the grit of the Nicktoons era was Klasky Chupo. So like stuff like Rugrats, Real Monsters, Thornberries, Duckman was Klasky Chupo. So it's that kind of less absolutely pristine animation that was popularized in the 80s and more stylized really growing in the 90s as well. I just wanted to add that for
Yeah.
people that might not have known.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it was just starting out. Actually, at the time, Klasky Cooper was mostly doing commercials involving motion graphics, which was a way to add life to logos to almost make them look like they were computer animated, but they're not computer animated. They had a great big giant Oxberry motorized camera, which was really kind of fun to work with because we could do of some interesting camera moves when we were doing the Tracy Ullman show Simpsons. But anyhow, that's how it all started. When we started doing that in, I think the first, like March 21st, 1987 is when we first started doing the first Simpson short, Good Night Simpsons.
And then obviously it became this massive, very popular part of the Tracy Ullman show, and
Right.
lawsuits notwithstanding, we look at the Simpsons series, right? And
Yes, we did this for 2 years. We did this from 87 to 89, and we did two Butterfinger commercials in November of 88. And
it's earlier than I remember. Wow, that's awesome.
yeah, in fact, that's where Millhouse was introduced in the Butterfinger commercial.
Really? Oh, wow.
Yes, because in the very first one we did, we needed a best friend for Bart to say, "Hey, Bart, want to trade lunches?" And that's where Pam Hayden got her gig there, which was a great gig for her. And we took a design that Matt had done for an non picked up show that he was developing with NBC, which was kind of interesting. It's kind of like Recess in a way, but he had designed a bunch of characters, and Wes and I were like flipping through, and then we like this kid with the glasses and the big nose and the eyes really far apart. So let's use this one.
You end up directing the pilot by accident, it seems, right? Like
Yes.
this wasn't intended to be the first episode. Is that correct? Or
That's correct. The first episode was we had another, and I won't mention his name. We had another guy. We had Wes and I were going to be the directors, but there were 13 episodes to do. We couldn't possibly direct all 13 of them, so they hired a guy who had experience in directing a half-hour TV. Right?
Mhm.
He worked on the Mighty Mouse show, the great Mighty Mouse show
Oh, wonderful. Yeah.
yeah, that Ralph Bakshi did and John Crisfalucci. And incidentally, what the writers in there included Andrew Stanton and Jim Reardon, who I met later.
Mhm.
But who became one of our great directors and great supervising director when I took a leave of absence, shall we say. In any event, well, they gave him, well, when I say they, I would say the Klasky Chupo gave him the first episode, the pilot to do, as opposed to me and Wes, because we hadn't done it before. I can understand that from that point of view, although from an artistic point of view, they were probably better off with one of us doing it.
Yeah.
But in any event, he did not do a very good job. Let's say his sensibility was a little bit almost diametrically opposed to the sensibility that Jim Brooks and Matt Groening and Sam Simon were interested in doing.
Mhm.
One that I understood apparently, because what happened was his show came back and it was kind of an unmitigated disaster. And there was talk about if David's show, that was my show, was the second show to come back, and it was called Bart the Genius. And if that show didn't come in looking great, they were literally going to pull the plug and just say, let's forget it. Let's just forget all about it. So it was kind of do or die that my show come back looking great. And I do remember 2 agonizing weeks of trying to get to sleep, going over the show in my mind that I had shipped, going like, yes, I did this. I think this is going to be okay. I certainly hope they do this right, not knowing what is going to get back. And then basically it was I think the first time that Jim Brooks and Matt Groening and everybody and Sam Simon and a bunch of the writers came to Klasky Chupo to watch this on, and was back in the day, or on a flatbed, with the mag and the reels and all that. And I'm like sitting in the middle, like sweating it out, like, because I hadn't seen it yet. Everybody assured me it looked good, but I hadn't seen it. And I just remember them laughing, like almost at the beginning. I just go like, oh, thank God.
Yeah, like, was it
God
relief, like, when you saw that first episode? Because, like, the labor intensive aspect
Oh, yeah.
of, because it's, I mean, obviously it's never easy, but as you are moving forward through life, it's going to get easier, every time, just a little bit, just
Oh, yeah.
by repetition. But this is really the first time you guys are doing a 22-minute show. Like, do you remember like the stress of that, other than just the nerves of what they'll think? But what about for you?
Well, part of it was this, when we realized that Wes and I had been basically co-directing the shorts,
Mhm.
when it came right down to it. We were really the directors of the shorts. We did everything. We timed it. We worked with each other. We boarded it. We looked over each other's shoulders as we were trying to develop the way the characters look. So I kind of looked at it that way. I said, well, I know about directing a short. It's about this long. I'll look at every sequence as a little mini short, and then I have to think about stringing them all together so it makes cinematic sense. And I think I just used all my sensibilities and gut instincts about directing and staging, and just kind of said, okay, here we go. Let's just hope it works out.
I have a book that I bought when I was in fourth grade, maybe. That was the storybook of that episode. I
Oh,
bought it
of
when I was a kid.
well, which
The
one? This
The
you're talking
Simpsons
about
Christmas, the
the
Christmas
Christmas,
one.
yes, right.
I,
Oh, yes. Yes, but hold on to that. Hang on to that thought,
okay,
because that sort of steps ahead. What's interesting is the first show I directed was Bart the Genius. That was show number two. The show that the other guy did was called A Night to Remember, I think, or Some Enchanted Evening. I forget what it was called. My reward for doing everything right was to redo that show at the very end of the season
that's
when I
the
took a
evil
4 day break.
babysitter one, right?
Yes, the Babysitter Bandit episode, yes. With Penny Marshall doing a guest voice.
Yeah,
But so the first show I did was Bart the Genius, followed by Bart the General, followed by the Christmas show, and then the other show I did was the bowling episode, Jacques the Bowler episode
with Albert Brooks,
with
right?
Albert Brooks,
Yeah.
which was great, great time. So what happened was, so my show came back. Everybody's relieved. They decide, okay, the original intention was to premiere the series in like beginning of November. That was the idea. And then the third show I directed, the Christmas episode, was going to be a Christmas episode. It was episode number 8. Well, they decided, okay, new idea. We are going to postpone the premiere date to be January 14th, 1990. And everybody, take a break or whatever and so forth. Except, David, you keep working on the Christmas show because that's going to be a Christmas special. I said, okay. So I did. And I do remember there was something about the very, very ending. We had I think we had the animatic or something like that. And they kind of rewrote the ending like at the last minute when I'm actually getting everything, doing the final layouts, working with my artists, and then getting overseas everything to Korea, to ACOM Studio. And they rewrote the ending. And I called up Richard Sakai, who's president, and my guy to help me out in the times of trouble. And he said, David, just cover the hell out of it. Just do animate coverage. I don't care. We don't know. So just do a master shot, 2 pickups. And I said, I got it. That's what I did. So it was one of the few times I did animated coverage for the last sequence because we didn't have time to board it out and do an animatic and see how it looked. We just guessed.
Jeez. Yeah, no
So
pressure. No,
that was no pressure. So that was kind of fun. And it was all crazy. And I was always, and the other great thing that happened, I think even before that, they decided to get Brad Bird in as a consultant on the Gracie side. I think their sensibility being, we need someone, they were a little bit concerned. I think they were basically concerned about the director I was talking about. And they didn't know how, they wanted somebody on their side who understood animation. And Brad Bird became a consultant, and that was great because he became a very good friend. And also, I learned a great deal from Brad about staging and directing.
and this wouldn't be the last time you guys would be within each other's proximity as well,
yes,
as we
yeah,
see in there.
yeah, but that was really a great, and he was a fantastic addition and not unsung, but I don't think people realize how much Brad added and gave to the board staff in his sensibilities of staging, and also contributing, getting a great artist involved, Jeffrey Lynch as a board artist, and then later directing. Oh yeah, I mean, there were so many great people back at the beginning of it. Then Rich Moore came in; was there at the beginning, and then we got Jim Reardon and Mark Kirkland, and those are the five, kind of the five of us directing.
A question for you from a production standpoint,
Yeah,
because what is old hat for you is stuff that I just don't know. So for example,
sure.
I don't know, how connected are you to, for example, the writer's room? Like how, what are the interactions with, are they is that something we can do, or is they just, they do it and then they're like, now put this
Well, at
together?
the beginning, I had a little bit more interaction with Matt and Sam, particularly because they were very happy that I had Essentially, because my show came back looking good, I kind of saved the show. So they really were very happy with me. So I had more interaction, and yeah, Sam was very generous. I remember when I did Bart the General, basically we do that, we get notes back from him, and he said, just come up with a bunch of ideas for the staging, the third act of the training sequence. I trust you on this. So okay, so I kind of wrote the material a lot of the material in that the third act of that, and then that sort of changed as I got more confident, and the writers' room changed, and like the second season became there'd be more kind of a structure to it. But as a supervising director in the third season, I became more involved working directly with the showrunners, the executive producers, particularly with David Merkin. David Merkin and I really connected very well. I mean, we all did. I mean, I did with Matt and Sam, obviously, and certainly with Al Jean and Mike Reese. But Merkin sort of even got me more involved in many ways
It's
as supervisor.
definitely one of those things I've seen from like when you look into it and look at all of the amazing work that you guys have done and put together. And like I think the one of the like first questions that comes to my mind is like, did you know? I don't think anybody can predict that you're going to be having your hand in the biggest television show of all time, right? But like when you guys saw that, like as it started coming in and you started seeing this, was it like, I hope they don't cancel, or was it like, no, we're on to something and this is huge? Like what was the vibe?
I'll tell you, when I first, people have asked me that before, and I always say when I first read Bart the Genius, written by John Vitti, I just thought this is one of the funniest things, if not the funniest things I ever read for animation, be it a feature or a TV show. This is definitely a hilarious script. It might be the funniest thing I ever read for animation. And, being a fan of the Bullwinkle show, all I could think is I would tell people, I said, listen, if you like the Bullwinkle show, you're definitely going to like this. And I would think the critics are going to love it. The critics will love the show. I have no question about it. We're going to get critical raves. Whether it connects to the audience, I couldn't tell you. I wouldn't know. I couldn't see that far, and see if the audience would have an appetite for it. But I soon found out when we aired the Christmas episode. I went back to visit my folks and family in Maryland, and I was at this. It was called, what was it, the White Flint Mall. Sadly, no longer there. But it was a high-end
As
mall. We
is
were
the
going there.
case.
Yes. There was no Simpson merchandising at this point, obviously, because this was the first air. So there was no. And I was wearing, though, a crew jacket, and you've probably seen these famous Letterman crew jackets. It was
Varsity
sort of
jacket, yeah.
with the red leather sleeves and the Bart on and then the whole family, based on a drawing that I did from a sketch from Sam Simon. And I was walking around this mall and people were stopping me, asking me, where did I get the jacket? Can they buy the jacket? It'd be a great Christmas gift. I had my name David emblazoned on it. They were calling out, hey, David. And I was thinking, is this somebody from high school I haven't seen in, 15 years or something like that? And he said, no, I don't know you, but where did you get that jacket? Or people were talking behind my back. Hey, did you see the Simpsons Christmas
You're the
special? It's
cock of
really
the walk of the Maryland Mall.
I know. I know. And it didn't even occur to me that I was just wearing this jacket. And well, it was warm, and it was cold out there.
Yeah, so
So, as we like to say, good heavens, Watson, a clue. So that made me think that we might be onto something. And
I
then when the show hit, it was like instant, like snap fingers, like, okay, boom.
there's you have great stories because Vice did Icons Unleashed, I believe, or Unearthed.
Hmm?
They did a season on The Simpsons, and it's fascinating, and you are this really great part of that, which was
Yeah.
really fun watching it and being like, wait a second, I know that guy. Like just like really having a lot of fun with that. And so like as I start looking through, I went to my patrons and I was like, hey guys, if you have any Simpsons questions,
Yeah.
like let's go. So I'm going to do that because we have some producers to read. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. These are from the patrons here.
Okay.
And there's a couple of them that this first one I think is a question that I delighted to see because it's one of the questions I would have asked, which is Jay the Crow Baron says, if you had to pick one episode to show to someone who's never seen the show to
Mhm.
help them get it, which one would it be and why?
Huh. That's really interesting. That's really interesting. There's quite a few. I mean, obviously the monorail comes up. as a
Oh,
good one.
yeah.
But in some ways, if they'd never seen the show before, I don't know if they'd be a little bit, if they would have to catch up. Another one that actually might be a great one to show somebody who had never seen the show, because I think there's some grounding to it, was Last Exit to Springfield, where Homer becomes union boss.
Oh, yeah.
Because that is
Good one.
also wild. It's wildly funny, but it's a little grounded, in the family, and there's some realism in that grounding of the family, so you might be able to follow it a little bit. Whereas the monorail one, which is hilarious, it just sort of starts nutty and goes crazier. So
I
they're both beautifully great shows.
I loved because you did the animation parts for the Simpsons Take the Bowl at the Hollywood Bowl several years ago.
Yes, yes, I
Um,
was directed that. Yes,
I
yeah.
was there. I still have
Oh, nice,
I still have a
nice.
button, and
All
having
right,
Conan
right.
come out to sing the monorail bit was really just
That was so wonderful. That was so
um
wonderful.
some of these have to do with
I guess you saw me with the flaming tuba. Yes,
you
that's right.
know I did. You know I did. I cannot wait to get to that part. So some of these questions have to do with writing, which they might not apply. So if it doesn't really apply to you, you don't have that answer.
I could probably give
Um,
some coaching answer, but go ahead.
this is a two-parter from Walker. He says, "Is there like an actor that you guys worked with where you're like, this man is fascinatingly weird? Like somebody that just tickled your weirdness, funny bone in just the best way possible."
Well, not so much that he was just really great, and that was James Woods. He was really great playing himself, and he was very fun to work with because he was so game to, he would really ad lib a bunch of great stuff. And I think that led to him doing the voice of Hades. I think that might have helped. But I got to say, I'm wrong. The person who really is great, is the best, was Albert Brooks. Because Albert Brooks would get, he like, especially, it really started with Jacques de Bowler. And I have that, I've got to find that tape. I have it somewhere. Because he must have recorded about an hour of ad lib material, either with himself or with Julie Kavner, constantly breaking Julie up, which was great because it allowed us to, we realized, oh, it's great when Julie laughs. It's a great thing for Marge to do. We got to get Marge laughing more because she's so charming at it. Because Julie and Albert Brooks, I think, went to high school together, or they knew each other.
Oh wow, yeah.
They were old friends. So when they were ad-libbing with each other, they were great. And Brooks was hilarious. I mean, he was just, and as I said, he did like an hour of material of just ad-libbing, and later on, I think it's pretty famous. He and Dan Castellaneta in the great episode "You Only Move Twice," they were ad-libbing up a store with a whole hammock district.
Yeah.
Like the
The Hank
moccasins.
Scorpio thing
Get
is.
out of here, you lousy shoe! Yeah, that was all ad-libbed.
Is there an actor that you have on your wish list? Like somebody that you would give anything, like we got to get.
Well,
Tom
we
Cruise.
have our. I don't have that, but we have two that are, man. We should have asked them because they are no longer with us.
Oh, who was
And
that?
well, the first one, Alec Guinness passed away. We kept seeing several times in his obituaries that one of his favorite things, like, doing this and watching The Simpsons. And we're going, oh, we could have had him on the show. What's wrong with us? And the same thing happened when Stanley Kubrick passed away. One of his favorite things was The Simpsons. We said, oh, we parodied him about 3,000 times. We should have had him on the show. I mean,
Yeah.
I think you can almost reconstruct 2001. We maybe parodied every major moment from that film.
Oh, yeah, right.
So there's a regret list more than the wish
Oh,
list.
I
Oh,
mean
I have to
that's
say,
actually the way they worded the question is actually closer to do you have a regret list? But I wanted to.
yeah, those are two big regrets. I have to mention, because when I speak of ad libbing, there's a great story of how Principal Skinner and Chalmers were kind of formed their relationship in that first episode where we first see them together. And it's the episode, I think, when Skinner gets fired. I think it was the first episode they were in together.
Yeah.
But Hank Azaria doing Chalmers and Harry Shearer doing Skinner, they just started ad-libbing these things. And the greatest ad-lib was, I think what was written was, Lisa answers about the battle, and Ralph says, "What's a battle?"
He said, "What's a battle?" I said, "What's that battle?"
Battle, let's go. And that was it. And then they just kept going. And Hank said, well, I distinctly heard battle. Oh, well, I've had a cold. You have a cold, so you hear ours as B, B's as ours? Yes,
Yes.
I
Which
understand.
Which I mean, I it seems to me that like the very famously steamed hams segment has very much the energy that was birthed from that
Exactly. Yes.
yeah,
Where that was not ad libbed, but I think that
inspired by
insanity
it. Yeah.
conversation literally was like, okay, that's the thing that Skinner's always backpedaling and trying to sell something. And that's at one point, Chalmers either accepts it or gives up and accepts it. Just
The
like,
there's that always reminds me, one of my favorite jokes of all time is from that episode you were talking about where Skinner gets fired, where he just goes around, he goes, and everywhere I go I see classrooms full of ugly children, and he just goes, well, I don't see why we have anything to do with it. And there's something about like the defeatedness of the delivery on that, just really fun.
so
Brian
great. You
Betts
have
is
to go ahead. Go ahead. Yes, please.
Brian Betts is saying that I've been getting a real kick out of the old Simpsons character bits, being my favorite being Krusty portraying the show anachronistically, like the reruns where he interviews George Meany. And so like obviously the writing aspect of gags like that, it's hard to dive into that, but like the how do you guys go into that recreation of that sort of era and bring it into that modern world?
Well, I guess it's interesting because even at the time we were writing that, it was getting it was sailing off into history and out of people's consciousness. Now those sort of shows, you have people going like, "What the who are you talking about?" But I think that was sort of the absurdity, especially about back then. You really didn't see animation characters referencing those sort of actual realities, and I think that just made it all the funnier that it was happening on an animated show. There was something very unusual and fresh about this that hadn't really been done before. So there was that aspect of it too. And then just having fun when we get to that kind of thing of just I think we like playing the earnestness of it. And I think that was one of the things that going back to that beginning that this other guy didn't get at the very beginning of The Simpsons is we got to play the laughs honestly. It's not about jokiness and winking at the camera and making silly faces while something else is happening. It's about the emotional, realistic human response. And that's what Matt also would always talk about, which I thought was great, is that look, they look weird and strange and they're silly cartoon characters. You get more laughs the more human they act than them acting, broad. Well, then, by the way, and then we have our explosions and broad, fun comic acting, like Homer having a heart attack. But what sets that off is a contrast, because all the other acting prior before that is just sort of like you wait to set off your fireworks, if
Your
you
money
will.
shot, yeah.
Yeah.
Joe Dude asks, was there any like who was the most excited to be a guest working on The Simpsons for video? Do you know it? Like, did you have access like
I,
the people that were just the most into it?
I couldn't really say. A lot of people were fans. It was interesting too because, for example, not they were excited, but they did it and obviously Jim Brooks would be a friend of Dustin Hoffman, which was a big coup back then, getting a star like him. But he did it because his grandkids liked the show, you
Yeah,
know.
really?
So there's that happens a lot. Back in the beginning, a lot of celebrities say, "Well, my children love the show, so I thought I'd do this," or something like that. But I don't know. You know who was very excited just recently, and he hadn't been on the show. He was on the short. I've done like 9 shorts for Disney Plus now.
Yeah.
Um, and we did one called "The Good, the Bart, and the Loki," and we got the actor playing Loki,
Tom Hiddleston.
Tom Hiddleston. Yes, sorry. He was very excited to be on it. He was very pleased. I
Yeah.
mean, we're so happy to get him, and we're big fans of his work. But he was almost like a bigger fan of our work, so that was quite satisfying.
Yeah, I mean, you are ingrained to the DNA of pop culture, so that would make
Yeah,
sense. Like that would
yeah. I
explain
guess
it.
I tend to forget that.
Justin Wood asked a question. I can't ask the second part because if I do, there's all sorts of legal stuff to that, Justin. Because he gave a
Sorry,
suggest.
Justin.
Justin gave a suggestion, and if you give a suggestion to somebody and it's documented, that's how lawsuits happen. So stop,
You can't do that.
yeah,
Nope, you
stop
don't.
fan casting stuff
I
on
don't.
Twitter,
I stick
folks.
my fingers in my ears and go la 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 la.
Yeah, I think J. Michael Straczynski does this thing where, like, if you are like, I have an idea, he blocks you immediately because he's like, I can't hear it. I'll get sued.
Yeah.
But the question is, how would you end the show if you were the one person making the decision? Which obviously, that. Oh, I will also add, is the finale, has the finale like existed in a when it's time We have that, or is it just like we're just gonna roll with it forever?
If
The bat.
it exists, I wouldn't know,
Yeah.
and how to end it, I wouldn't hazard a guess. So
Okay.
sorry, I'm
Easy
gonna have
enough.
to give a pass on that one, Justin.
It's easy enough, Justin. It's a good question, Justin. But yeah, that's it's a big one. James Duff says, and I don't know if you would know the answer, but was there a writer in the writers' room that was always like the funny one that would always get the laugh, or are they all pretty?
I think everybody gets gets a good laugh. I know that Conan was probably famously hilarious
Yeah.
in his because you kind of saw the evidence of that in the show that he did. So
Too
he was
bad that's
quite.
all he did.
That's right. He's quite he was quite the comedian. I would say, my times and experience being in the writing room, a lot of the writing room is a lot of this. People sitting around and staring at the ceiling as they try to think of the next joke. So
Yeah.
it's not a I mean, at times it gets kind of raucous, but at times it gets kind of quiet. A lot of
Yeah.
times it gets quiet
Yeah. I mean, that
because
would make sense. I totally get that. And yeah,
you know
like you are, these are the funniest people in the world really doing
and
this too.
yeah, but it happens that you're thinking of material. It's like, okay, we have to fix this thing here, right? Because this joke isn't landing, and we have to emphasize. A lot of it's about, okay, we have to strengthen the storytelling that we're doing here, but in a funny way. So how do we do that? And then that's when you get people going like, well, let's me think, and then there's pause, 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 until somebody says something. And I've even been there a few times, and the thing is, you feel safe to throw out anything, even if it's a stupid thing. But the point is, any stupid thing you may say may trigger somebody else's imagination. So there's no shame in pitching out something that like drops like a stone. It doesn't matter, because even what you say may lead to something else. So, but
Yeah,
again,
that's
a lot of
brilliant.
it is
Yeah.
quiet thinking.
Oliver wants to know what character you think personally would make the best spin-off character for, like, if there was going to be a show for a character, or do spin-offs,
Well,
or is that an offensive concept, a spin-off?
no, there's nothing offensive about that. We were actually planning, actually, you probably know this. They were planning a spin-off of Krusty. They're going to do a live action
Yeah.
Krusty with Dan Castellaneta, which would have been hilarious, doing the voice. It never materialized. But if you think about that, that could be an interesting spin-off. We thought about, I think Matt even thought about doing like something like Simpson Tales that would like focus completely on the secondary characters.
Oh yeah,
But
like there was that really wonderful, there was a spin-off episode which I remember.
right, I mean,
There was
jokingly,
also famously there was the mini-sodes episode where it was like 21 Tales of Spring. I forget what the
yeah,
title was.
22 short films about Springfield, which is
Yes.
based on that. I think 22 short films about Glenn Gould
Yeah.
is we take it from. But yeah, but we kind of thought about this. Said, well, we're kind of doing that already in the show. Because
Yeah.
like we did that great episode recently where Principal Skinner, rather, and the Superintendent Chalmers have a road trip to Cincinnati, and which they famously pass in the background a steamed ham restaurant.
It's
But
a beautiful. I saw a meme about that where it was like places in the country where it's called hamburgers and steamed hams, and it was just this little part of Cincinnati.
yeah,
Very, very happy that that got the call back, several decades later. We're gonna move a little forward real quick, but before we do that, I am going to tell you that I may have told you this before, David. We have producers, and if you go to patreon.com/Jeff May and sign up to be a producer, I will say your name to a guest like David Silverman. And we're going to give a big shout out. And some of these actually spurn a couple of questions as well, because, sometimes we ask questions. So we'd like to shout out to Call Me Sean or whatever. Shout out to the Oatmeal Savage. Shout out to Watch Me Use These Prehensile Nipples to pick up pennies off the floor. There's going to be a lot of nipple talk in here, so you're going to want to zone that out. Check out this month's Nerd with Dre and Jeff. And then he says, Jeff, you can say whatever you want here, including being lazy and just reading this. We're going to be talking about He-Man this month. Shout out to Normal Man, Andrew McGuire. Shout out to Dan Hackroyd. Norm from Cheers. You guys had George Wendt on the show before, right?
probably.
Didn't he and Barney get into a fight?
I suppose I used to have an encyclopedic memory about everything, but that ship has sailed.
I mean, you're still doing pretty good.
I'm batting a good 85%. I think that's
Yeah,
just
you're knocking it out of the park. Shout out to Dan Adamski, world's humblest man, Bart Fartigan. Shout out to the To Be Terror Bunny, says the strike may be over, but egg anyway, because David, don't say anything about that one. You work for Disney.
Okay.
Shout out to Mr. Billy Beck. Shout out to Aldo Vargas, is a couple months behind his podcast, but he'll hear this eventually. This show is brought to you by that scene in Lost City where Brad Pitt dies, the ghost of Dave Thomas. I'm gonna start calling Yoda Old Grogu just to see what happens. Mashed potatoes are the brioche buns of side dishes. That's because I think both of those items are overrated. People give me a very hard time about that. And of course, shout out to the enchanting, wandering, unpierced left nipple cider served at room temperature. Those are our producers for the show. You can be one of those. I'm going to roll over that real quick because I have so many questions and we are running out of time.
I thought we were just getting started.
I thought we were too. I mean, look, we can extend it a little bit if you're okay with it. I don't know what your schedule is
Fun
like.
with that.
We
Oh,
can
by the way, yes, yes, indeed. Of course, George Wendt was in it. It was in season 6. We did a whole thing with most of the Cheers cast.
went into the wrong bar, right?
Yeah,
It's one
something
where
like
Homer was looking for a new bar.
that. Yeah, I think so.
Is that the
Yeah.
guy incognito episode, right? Like, which is also one of my favorite jokes of all time. So, one of the things that I want to talk about too is because there's a pocket of time after you had been with The Simpsons for what felt like a little over a decade, right? Or around a
Yeah,
decade.
about 9 years, and then you're talking about when I took a sojourn away, right?
Yeah, you traveled into different corners of the animation verse.
Yeah. Well, what
Um,
happened was I got a little of my agent got in touch with me and said, Jeffrey Katzenberg wants to have a meeting with you. I was like, wow, that's kind of big stuff. It's back in the day that, DreamWorks was just getting started. And if you wanted to direct an animation, it seemed from my vantage point and most people's vantage point at the time, the only way you could do that was to be at Disney and be directing a Disney feature. And this is an opportunity to direct a feature at a new studio. And my favorite line about this is I was at the time, after 9 years on the show, I said, well, The Simpsons can't last forever.
Spoiler alert.
I know. Yeah, I know. Well, that shows you how good I am at making predictions. So I ended up working at DreamWorks. I wanted to work with Will Finn, who was a brilliant animator, story artist, and director. We worked together on The Road to El Dorado. And I was going to stay there, but then I literally got a call from Steve Jobs' office to entertain the idea of working at Pixar. And I thought, well, maybe I should do that instead. So after 2 years at DreamWorks, I went to Pixar and was co-director on Monsters, Inc., working with the great Pete Docter and the great Lee Unkrich.
You accidentally caused me to get people to look at me weird because I saw that movie when I was in college in the theater. And me and my friend Clay were the only two adults that didn't have children in that. It would be like two 20-year-old men walking into a Chuck E. Cheese alone. The amount of looks we got, and we're just like, man, we just want to see.
Well, that was a different time. People were not so accepting,
Of man children.
I guess.
So when it comes to
yeah.
co-director, does that mean like you guys are working on one half of the film each? Like, how does that work if you're co-directing? Like, are you both
They're different
together?
aspects. In many ways, I would say this as well, Pete, it was Pete's idea and Pete's vision. And I came on as basically a co-director and working with him because there's so much, you see that a lot on the Pixar films. In my case, I really was they kind of made me in charge of, they called me the story king because I was sort of working hard with the story department with our head of story, Bob Peterson, and also working a little bit with us too is the great late Joe Ranft, one of the greatest story artists in the history of animation. And so that was sort of I was focusing on that and staging, and then Lee came in and was working closely more on the editing and some of the staging aspects. And so we sort of broke it up like that because we had a lot of work to do in this film. And it was a really big, complex film for its time. And there was just so much going on, the hair thing going on, even the cloth was new. So we're doing a lot of different things. In fact, one of the things we decided to do with Little Boo was give her pigtails because at least we could just animate them easily instead of trying to think of another hair project to do.
Oh, yeah.
We didn't have budget to do all that.
You're like, that saved 4 months and $80 million by giving her the pigs. So looking at this now too, because this period is leapfroggy, which is interesting to me because you're going from, at the time, a Fox affiliate, working Gracie and all that and The Simpsons. Then you're going to The Road to El Dorado, which is DreamWorks, then Monsters, Inc. And then you go back to being a story consultant on Ice Age which is back to
Oh,
DreamWorks.
well, no, because what happened, not quite. What happened was after Monsters, as much as I thought, living in the Bay Area was a thing for me, and I really do love it up there, but I kind of missed Southern California, and I kind of missed working on The Simpsons. I think I went back to like a party, and I saw everybody, all my old friends, and I was like, wow, I kind of miss where I came from. And so I came back. I was doing different things after Monsters Inc. I worked on Looney Tunes Back in Action, and then I came back on The Simpsons. Well, I came back and was consulting at the same time as I was doing that.
Mhm.
But what also happened was when I came back to doing that, Chris Meledandri at the time was running Fox Animation, and he wanted me to help out on Ice Age,
Yeah,
which was a Fox film.
it was
And
Fox.
so,
Never mind. Yeah.
yeah, Fox, and so I did, and so all that was happening around the same time, and then I was brought in for a meeting because Jim Reardon, who took over for me as supervising director, he got a call to go up to work at Pixar with some of his old friends like Andrew Stanton and such, and so he was leaving the job as supervising director. So they called me in for a meeting to think about who I might suggest for to be the supervising director out of the directing group. And I came to realize that, oh, they're here to recruit me to be supervising director again. So times being what they were, I accepted the job.
Yeah.
Uh, and also, I wanted to be in a good position to be directing the Simpsons movie,
Which
which was,
apparently you were in because you
yes,
did that.
yes,
Which
I did
is
that. And that was in the works and so forth. So, yeah.
that was my final prep for this. Was while I had done my research, I did turn the Simpsons movie on again to watch it, and just so delightful. Did my research. It was interesting to see that a lot of the original writers were brought back specifically for this film, and I loved it. There was like an interview where somebody asked like, "What? Why now?" or whatever, and you guys were like, "Well, you've been asking for it forever, and we didn't even know we could do that," which I
Right,
found very
exactly.
fun. Yeah.
I mean, no matter when we would do it, they question me like, "Why now?" It's like, well, it's I guess a legitimate question, but
Yeah. It's
but
funny to look at sort of your history through there because obviously that didn't make you done, obviously like that you're not done at that. But I mean, the Simpsons movie, I think, shattered expectations. Even like
oh yeah,
everybody knew it was the Simpsons, but like there's always that sort of, and I don't like that myth that I think like oh, the Simpsons has gone downhill after whatever season, and you're like, I feel like maybe you just got old and it's not the thing that you
I don't
grew.
think I think you've gone downhill, not the show.
It's, I mean, but the fair, like I say this a lot in fandoms too, which is like, are you sure you like, you know, He-Man or whatever like that, or Star Wars? It's like, are you sure that, or do you just remember not paying bills and the feeling of freedom that you get from that? And like,
I
that's real.
it was a famous there was a famous, and I can't think of the guy who said it, but I believe some famous science fiction writer, someone could probably knows the answer to this. He was asked what was the best, science fiction book, and he said 14. Said, what do you mean? Said, whatever science fiction book you read when you're age 14, that's going to be your favorite science fiction book. That will be your best book because you're 14. And that's when that stuff sort of comes into. It's the same sort of thing that you're saying. Is that, well, I saw it at
Yeah.
this age and now it's not as good. I mean, it's so funny. Like classic episodes in like there's a group called No Homers, which is sort of famous.
The
They're sort of
Homers.
yeah, no Homers dot org or whatever, and it was one of the early fan critical sites, and any episode we would do, even the ones that are considered now classics, were like the worst episode ever. So that's where we got that line, and that's what inspired Itchy and Scratchy and Poochie was, and especially the line "No worst episode ever." We took from this group. The point is, in the what is now considered the real heyday of the show was this. It was being totally, fans were always tearing it apart. So we're used to it. So, we'll see what happens. Now there's a whole group of people that said, oh, I can't stand the older shows. I prefer the newer ones. And I think, great, that's fine. Whatever you like, as long as you like something. If you like
There's
something from
enough
the show,
season.
I'm happy. If you like some episode of the show, if you don't like it now, great, don't watch it. But if you do, great, keep watching. I got to tell you, there's some great episodes coming up. I'm just saying, you might think, oh, I don't like the show. It's like, well, You ain't seen nothing yet. There's
Yeah,
some really great episodes we're working on.
I do ask people a lot, like, when was the last time you watched? Because a lot of people are like watching other things, and
Sure.
that's okay. It's okay to
All
like,
right.
have your taste shift. But just because you don't watch something doesn't mean it's not good anymore. It just means that you're now, what at the time you were watching The Sopranos on Sunday nights or whatever it was, or you know,
Exactly.
like you have kids now and you don't have time on Sunday night to do that because you're putting them to bed, or I don't know.
We recently had an episode that I really liked because it was kind of like 22 short films about Springfield. It's when these people took over and were trying to hold it, the network hostage, and they were going to continue to play unused Simpson clips that will totally destroy the franchise. And it was a great episode because it just allowed us to do silly little one-off alternate universe ideas, kind of like 22 short films about Springfield.
One of I'm we're gonna about to finish the episode for the freeloaders, which is very nice.
The free uploaders.
If you are listening to this for free, thank you so much. If you want to hear, we have bonus content coming up, and that's at patreon.com/jeffmay. I want to circle back a little bit to some of the touchstones, because like Simpsons, obviously, you're still doing great. The Simpsons is still doing great, and we love to see that. And we're going to talk about the shorts. That's actually one of the things I really wanted, because I have
Oh
some
yeah.
good questions about that for the bonus content. I want to talk about some projects that you worked on, and one that you said you worked on, but I haven't found where that was. But you worked on the Mr. T cartoon?
Very, very tangentially on
Tangentially.
it. Well, Mr. T and Turbo Teen is something I did in between. I don't know, before One Crazy Summer, and I was working on my piano books at the same time.
Yeah.
But I forgot, a friend of mine got me to interview at Ruby Spears, and I was put into a crazy unit, John Dorman, and one of the great artists there was Jim Woodring, who later became a great underground, great cartoonist with his tantalizing tales. You should check out his work. I think Dark Horse maybe prints it. Anyhow, and also a guy became a very famous animator later, genius animator, Duncan Marchbanks, who did Sebastian the Crab, and when afterwards, he went to Disney when Disney sort of woke up and decided to do cartoons again. And I was his assistant. He was designing characters, and a lot of it were from Doug Wiley. Doug Wiley was a character designer for Turbo Teen, and I
Mhm.
was I was his assistant, cleaning them up and doing turnarounds. And that was my gig. I wasn't doing boards. I wasn't directing or anything
Mm.
like that.
Just turn
It was
around.
early in my career, but it was great.
That's it's a
It
great
was
way to start it out, like
great way to start. I met a lot of great people. It was one of the funniest jobs I ever had. I mean, it was like termite terrace, as far as I could understand from what I read about that, because we were constantly clowning around and doing silly things. I mean, we managed to get the work done, but we were more or less just trying to make each other laugh because we were working on these shows that were not trying to make anybody else laugh. So we had figured we may as well make ourselves. I mean, the shows we would have put on would have been far funnier because they didn't understand irony at the time. Now if
yeah.
you did the Mr. T show, it'd be hilarious because you get people who are ironic and meta and all that kind of stuff.
Well, they
But we
kind of
couldn't
did that.
convince Ruby and Spears that you can
Yeah.
be ironic, and they were like, and we wrote things that were ironic, and they were like, nope, we don't want to do that. Nope.
Yeah, it was very self-serious. I know like the Mike Tyson mysteries is like I think a direct version of the Mr. T, but with the
Right.
ironic comedy of
But
it
they
that
are, yeah,
really worked.
exactly.
Yeah.
They just said, okay, well, they tried that. Let's do it right this time. But anyhow,
Yeah.
I had a very sort of charming and colorful existence before The Simpsons. Let's face it.
Now, after The Simpsons, one thing that you worked on that I know there was like a little bit of rumblings, interoffice stuff, was you worked on visual design for The Critic. And I remember that crossover episode was very controversial in-house, which
Oh
I
yeah.
very interesting. But you got to work on visual design for The Critic.
Yeah, I actually kind of designed a Jay Sherman. I spent an afternoon hanging out with Jim, and we were coming up with things. And there was a photograph actually of Andy Kaufman as Latka on the wall that had this sort of face like that. And I said, there's something charming about that. And I kind of just tangentially based it. That sort of triggered my imagination. I was sort of drawing a character roughly based on that, and that was sort of like and obviously when they did the show, they fixed the design a little bit because it was fitting into their overall
Their aesthetic.
design sense, character
Did
sensibility. But
did
that was the main thing.
John did John Lovitz's appearance have any influence on that whatsoever,
Yes,
or was
yes.
he
It
voice
was, it
only
was,
and then it's like he'll fit in it?
well, kind of something about his appearance probably was also in the back of my mind because he kind of does end up looking like
A little
John
bit, yeah.
a little bit, a little bit. So I think that was also a trigger. But there's something about that photograph that led me to that direction. Again, I wasn't doing a caricature of Annie Kaufman as Latka, but there was a charm about that that made me think in that direction somehow.
When I'm 13 years old, one of my favorite, most insane shows to watch and enjoy was Eek the Cat. And I didn't realize at the time that Savage Steve Holland, the guy who had made Better Off Dead, which was weirdly
Right,
one
and
of
Bill
my favorite
Kopp.
movies when I was that age, which
And,
is weird.
and that's where Bill Kopp
Bill
went when he
Cop.
left The Simpsons. He ended up with that. He would do the voice of Eek the Cat and a lot of those shows. And then I worked on the show. I was trying to do something with him called Clutter, and that was part of the Eek. Uh, and I did a voice. I did a voice on that show. So
John Heap.
yeah. Oh, you know
Yeah.
all about me.
The character
Yes,
was
that's
John
right.
Heap.
I did a voice like this for that show. Yeah.
I do my research, which is very fun. And a couple things you did work on, you directed a commercial. You've done a million things. I'm just picking the stuff that I think is really weirdly fascinating. You directed a commercial for RoboCop 3 in
Yes.
universe for Johnny Rehab, which when I was going through, I was like, no, because it's such a weird, silly
Well,
thing to have.
I know. And Fred Decker wanted to do this, and Fred Decker and I went to UCLA together.
Oh,
So we're
perfect.
friends from UCLA, along with Shane Black. We're all pals at UCLA. And so Fred wanted me to do this, and I did, and I boarded it out, and I gave it to Greg Vanzo to animate. And the early beginnings of Rough Draft Studio, that was one of the things they did. I'm thinking Vanzo may have animated most of it. He's a genius animator and very funny, terrific draftsman, and very fast. So there's a good chance he animated a lot of that himself, I think. But I worked with Rough Draft, and yeah, that was fun. I enjoyed doing that. Yeah, I kind of designed all the characters in the board stage, really, and we just sort of went from that.
One of the more interesting parts of this that I really think is really fascinating, and it ties into the last time I saw you, is you actually acted in Werewolf by Night, directed by our friend Michael Giacchino, who definitely was enjoying putting his friends in there. Of course, Kirk Thatcher got to be in there as an absolute
Right.
badass. And your character is Flaming Tuba.
That's my character. He asked me, "Do I want to be billed as Flaming Tuba guy or or the Flaming Tuba?" And I just, I don't know. Flaming Tuba, I guess, is interesting enough.
You are in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. You are a character.
Yes, I've been scanned in and stamped, and can be utilized at any moment. I don't know if I'm going to be in the next Marvel movies, but that's yet to be seen.
We could try to get like maybe a Disney Plus series. You have a great relationship with Disney Plus, so that's great. You've put a lot of great work out there. Maybe we
Oh,
can
thank
sort of
you.
grease
Yeah,
the
maybe so, but maybe I can be a Funko a figurine. That'd be fun.
Let's do it. We'll contact former guest of the show, Zeb Wells, writer on She-Hulk, and we'll see if he can write you out episode. David, we're gonna end the show for the freeloaders. I want to sort of wrap this up first and foremost by saying thank you for taking the time.
My
Obviously,
pleasure.
in case you guys haven't noticed, he can be a busy guy. So to be able to take this time and to do that is really important. Now, obviously, the things that we promote are all of the things you've worked on, but what else should we be sort of promoting? What should we be looking for, or what attention, what eyes do we want on?
Oh, I would say watch The Simpsons. Watch it all the time. Watch it every day. 3 episodes a day. I command thee. And watch the new episodes, my friends. If some of you are jaded, oh, who doesn't like to be jaded? Jaded is a fun part of life. But I would recommend watching the new episodes. You may be surprised, or you may be more jaded. I don't know.
Yeah, I definitely would suggest to check that out and follow Dave on Instagram at or David. I don't know why I said Dave. Yeah, but it's
There's
also weird. I've never called you Dave in my entire life. So that's just a weird thing. Follow David at Silverooti. That's Silverootie on Instagram for lots of more information and to learn more about him. Hard to make a suggestion of like, hey, you should watch Simpsons, because I feel like most people are still doing that, which is really, really
oh,
great. David, you're a delight. For those of you that are listening on the free feed, if you want to head on over to patreon.com/Jeff May, David and I are going to continue this conversation for patrons only. So please feel free to check that out. And on top of that, you can also get early access to uncensored episodes, the bonus content, shows like Ugh Fine with Kim Crawl, early access to Nerd with Dre Alvarez. And then I got lots of stuff. Jeff has cool cards, the new YouTube page where I'm opening up packs of trading cards, maybe with my buddy Ken Knapsack, who also we hung out with on Monday. All the stuff I do with Adam Todd Brown and the You Don't Even Like podcast network, and Tom and Jeff watch Batman on Gamefully Unemployed. I run a comedy show in a toy store, second Friday of every month at Blast from the Past on Magnolia in Burbank, California. David, say goodbye to the freeloaders.
goodbye, freeloaders.
Bye. We love you guys. Bye.
Loading.
See ya. Hey, everyone. Our artwork is created by Justin T. Brown, who can be found at Artness by Justin Brown on Instagram, as well as artnessbyjustinbrown.com. That dope music you heard is by Troy Nababon, available at Troy Nababon on Instagram, as well as at troynababon.com. Nababon is spelled Nababan, and boy, does that shred. Thank you all so much for listening. See you next time.